Thanks very much for joining us for episode 47 of InTek Freight and Logistics, the podcast. I'm Kevin Baxter, joined by my co-host for this edition, InTek President Shelly Austin. Hi, Shelly.
Hi, Kevin.
We have spent some time on this podcast talking cross-border, and one of the largest, or the largest railroad in Mexico. We haven't actually had them on. We've talked to a couple of Class 1 railroads from the U.S., but we are privileged to have Luis Hernandez with Ferromex, the Vice President of Freight for Ferromex, on today to talk about not only what they do, but they've got some presence in the U.S. as well. So, Luis, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So first off, tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do with Ferromex. I know you've been there a bit, and you've got a pretty comprehensive role.
Yes. So I've been with Grupo Mexico Transportes, the holding, for 15 years now. I started my career back in Mexico with the Ferromex. Then when the Ferromex acquired the FEC, the Florida East Coast Railway, I moved to Florida to head the Intermodal. So that was in 2018. And since then, I've been up here trying to learn about the Florida movements, but very involved in the Mexico operation too. So 15 years only seeing chassis, containers, and cranes. So pretty much all intermodal throughout my career.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about Grupo Mexico. How we do have the Ferromex is kind of maybe the crown jewel that people know the most. But tell us a little bit more about the background there in terms of the overall company.
So Grupo is a big corporation. Big part of it is mining, but it has a transportation division. Under the transportation division, there's Ferromex. Ferromex is 74% owned by Grupo Mexico. 26% is an investment from Union Pacific, and that's because back in the late 90s, when the concessions were awarded, the requirement was to have a U.S. railroad involved in not actually in the decision making or on the operation, but more of an advisor to how to operate a railroad in Mexico. So that's why that kind of joint venture or co-investment is happening on the Ferromex. Apart from Ferromex, there's Ferrosur. Ferrosur is a line that runs from Mexico City to the port of Veracruz on the southeast Mexico. Then also Intermodal Mexico, or IMEX. That's our ramp operators. They operate all our ramps in Mexico. And since 2021, they operate our ramps in Florida. So they operate Miami, Fort Lauderdale, Titusville, and Jacksonville. Another short line that Grupo Mexico owns is Texas Pacifico, that runs from the border in Mexico, in Presidio, Texas, through the West Texas up to San Angelo Junction, there with connection with the Forward and Western to reach out the Forward area. And definitely the youngest to the group, but the oldest of them all is the FEC. It was acquired in 2017, but has been running since 1895, a flagship here for the state of Florida.
So you are in Florida since we just recently dealt with the hurricane. You're on the East Coast, so you weren't hit as hard as the West Coast, obviously. But how are you seeing with the FEC and the whole area dealing with the aftermath now?
Well, Florida has always been impacted by hurricanes, right? So right. The operations team has a very robust protocol for hurricanes and preparedness. So we start preparing 2 or 3 days in advance by putting materials close to the track, preparing people to be ready to respond fast. In this case, it was not impacting us directly. We had some disruptions there in Jacksonville as the hurricane went through. Fortunately, this year we haven't been impacted, and we knock on wood that won't happen. But in the past, it has been impacted, and we're quite fast to recover, right? So we have everything deployed through our track to be able to reopen as fast as we can, because there's a lot of industries that depend on the FEC readiness to have not only their products, but their business. We move for example, chlorine for the city of Miami, for water in the city of Miami. So in case there's a disruption, we have to act fast, because if not, water will start being a scarce product here.
So along that same line, Luis, we have the hurricane, the destruction of the hurricane, and then all of a sudden we have a port strike. And we were just chatting a little bit about this, but I thought it was very interesting, because most people that don't understand the industry, and I guess to a certain degree, they don't understand all the workings of what unions are affected and what areas are affected. And we just think East Coast. Right. And so when somebody just thinks East Coast, they might think that your area is impacted, but it's impacted a little bit differently. So tell us a little bit about how you've been able to kind of be the hero in this situation and be able to help keep products flowing.
Well, more than a hero, we're partnered here with two regional carriers, Seaboard and Crowley, who own their terminals in both ports, Seaboard for Port of Miami and Crowley in Port Everglades. And they have a different arrangement, right? So who's striking is the ILA. Here in Port Everglades, Crowley has an agreement with the Teamsters, so they're not striking. And that's allowing them and us to be competitive in this market, right? So they're diverting their freight into the terminal that's open, so they can continue to be in business and not being impacted for this strike. The same as Seaboard in Port of Miami, so they're able to load and unload their vessels. And in Port of Miami, we're on dock, so that's right across from their vessels. We just dray them, hold them from the vessel to the rail, and then still put them north. So there's freight that's diverting from other ports in the north that are being hit by the strike, put them in Port of Miami, and then we rail it up north with our rail carrier partners, both the CSX and the Norfolk Southern.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's fantastic. The other thing that you mentioned, and Kevin's going to kick me. I'm going a little off script here, Luis. No. So hang with me here. So you talked about all these different groups in Grupo, and one of them that you mentioned was Texas. And so I think about all these things. One, we'll get into more details about Florida, because I think Florida is so cool about what you can do with intermodal. But traditionally people wouldn't think Mexico to Florida, and you have Mexico, and you have Texas, and you have Florida. So what can we see on the horizon? I mean, do we have some new intermodal lanes coming up? Do we have some new opportunities? I mean, what can we see, kind of expect to see with everything that you have in the abilities in the track? Because that's really where the growth is.
So we've been working with the Western railroads and with the Eastern guys to have routes from Mexico into Florida, right, through the border. So we have some connections with the UP going through Eagle Pass up to Memphis, and then Memphis south through Atlanta to come south with the NS and with the CSX. We're working with the BNSF to have a better connection, not only going up to Chicago, but there could be a potential interchange in Kansas City where we could see closer to the Southeast. Right now, the Southeast is like the forgotten Yule for the Mexico market.
Right.
And we share a huge border, but there's water in it, right?
Right.
And the other thing that we've been pushing, and we've been kind of working with the global carriers, is to have lanes from the port of Veracruz into to the ports on the east. Either Miami would be great because it's the shortest, or it's the first port of call, or it could be the first port of call. But there's still some things that have to be moved, right? Right now, the lanes that are touching Veracruz and going to the east ports have a long transit time. So they go through the ports in the Gulf, and then they will go to their transloading ports in the Caribbean, and then will come in. So you can see transit times of 30, 40 days to come from Veracruz into Jacksonville or Savannah.
Oh, wow.
or even further north.
Okay.
So unfortunately, right now, the biggest volumes that are coming into Florida from Mexico are being trucked. But we're working with the railroads from Mexico and with the Western carriers to have better connections.
Yeah, that's exciting.
Yeah, I looked actually on the Ferromex website earlier. There's also a rail ferry, correct? What does that do? Tell us a little bit about
So
that.
the rail ferry is a barge that can hold 150 rail cars. It connects the port of Coatzacoalcos, which is southern than Veracruz on the Gulf of Mexico, and the port of Mobile. And in Mobile, it connects to everybody, right? So CN, NS, and CSX. That's mainly for carload. We've done some test loads for auto racks for vehicles moved from in that lane. And we haven't tested intermodal. We made some analysis years ago, and the problem is that the height of the double stack can only fit on the upper deck, and the problem is that the walls of the vessel are not as high as the double stack. So the winds in the Gulf could turn over a flat car. But there's an option, right? We can work and probably get some engineering there and try to put higher walls and just modify the upper decker at some point that could be. But still in the process. Right now, we're only running carload, mainly forest products, paper, so paper going north, waste paper coming down, and some forest products, chemicals that are being produced in that area in Mexico in the southeast, going up north. It's heavy, the production of oil derivatives, so the refineries are down there and the chemical plants are there, and those are the ones that are moving up north. It's a great product. We recently announced that we just acquired 60% of that, 50% that was Secor, and 10% Genesee and Wyoming. So now it's a JV between Grupo Mexico and Genesee and Wyoming. So we have that as part of will be part of our portfolio here in the very short term.
Great. So there's constantly evaluations and different different efforts to improve the connections, really.
Correct. And Mexico has become a focus point in the logistics world, right? Everybody wants to go into Mexico. Well, actually, I think being up here, everybody wants to come out of Mexico. So one of the ways to create capacity down in Mexico, and then to have the routes to connect Mexico to the U.S.
And what are you seeing with that now? As we, it's the talk of the industry. It's the nearshoring is obviously a buzzword that we've been hearing for a couple of years in particular. But where do you see it right now in terms of the level of freight movement, and where are you, or when are you expecting it to really kick into high gear?
So right now, and throughout the probably 2-3 years, the past 2-3 years, investments have been coming to Mexico. I presume that they will be starting production here in the next year or maybe two before the renegotiation of the USMCA. So that will allow those companies to start shipping heavily. The Mexico intermodal history starts with international, right? So the first thing that was moved actually was cross-border, but it came from the port of LA into central Mexico, into Mexico City. And then there was the development of the Mexican ports. And if you think the port of Manzanillo being the largest port in the Pacific, but then the port of Veracruz on the Gulf of Mexico, which has a unique way of doing business, because a part of that is the closest port to the city. So it's call it short haul intermodal in Mexico. And then the newest, but has been growing a lot, is the port of Lázaro Cárdenas. And that's a port that's served by CPKC now, and also connects the Pacific with central Mexico and even further north. So we compete in two ports, but the good thing is that everything is coming into Mexico through the ports and then processed here and then exported, right? So there's a huge imbalance from both sides. From international, we move loads inbound, empties going back to the ports, and then we have to have empties coming back south from the border, then northbound loads. So we have to find that connection, or where can we be more efficient as an industry in the intermodal side to bring loads outbound to make it more competitive, to refill them up north. And the auto parts is a good example for that, right? So there's a lot of auto parts coming into Mexico, probably not enough, to fill the demand of the northbound. But if it will continue to be heavy on the northbound, then we'll need to find out how to make better economics there to have the empty south.
Yeah, you'd think that, as you do get into the more facilities being built by American companies, then maybe there is more of that exchange happening when with the existing locations here supplying and going back and forth a little bit more.
Yes, and again, I think the boom of nearshoring will happen here in the next 2-3 years. Now that they're up in production, we have that time to set the table for everybody to benefit from that, right? And to have real lanes, real interchanges, and most of it capacity.
And speaking of that infrastructure, then how do you feel that where that stands right now, and is it going to be ready for that?
I think yes. So I'll speak for Grupo, and we are investing in our terminals to grow them, to have more space, not only for parking. And again, we all know the challenges of intermodal, and definitely storage and dwell at terminals is a big challenge. And the idea is not to make larger terminals to store more containers, but also to handle them, right? So the bigger the terminal, it becomes more efficient as you can turn it faster. And that's the overall goal. The other thing that we're working down in Mexico are the processes, because customs it's a big process that has to be handled in the ramp. So we're working with customs brokers and with the BCOs and with the IMCs or the carriers in general to make that process as efficient as we can, so we can turn the ramp faster. The overall goal is to have the container in the terminal less than 24 hours, since in-gate, clear customs, and then loaded, and then start rolling north. And that's where I think the whole industry, because both railroads and all the customs broker industry is working towards to have those processes more efficient.
To that point, Luis, I hear that truckload is still the biggest part of Mexico transportation, the cross-border transportation, and it always floors me kind of what that percentage is, because it seems to be that the intermodal product is safer in a way, because it's continuously moving on the rail. And also there's always that challenge in trucking in the border crossing. And most of the intermodal services now, we're getting to the point where we're having a lot of steel wheel versus the rubber tire. So you don't have that same challenge on the border crossing. Tell us a little bit about what you see as far as the disparity between truck and intermodal, and what are some of the other factors that we really need to promote so everybody understands intermodal is really kind of the way to go?
Correct. I think so. Like the share of rail in the cross-border intermodal industry right now is like between 12 and 15% versus truck. The rest is moving over the road, and I think there's a history part in it. Intermodal in Mexico is quite new. It's young. It has 25 years since it has been developing. The cross-border, definitely one of them, 25, not more than 25 years. But the industry in Mexico is older than that. So originally, truck was the only way to move it. And there's a lot of investments and infrastructure around the borders. So if you think about customs brokers on both sides, they have huge infrastructure in the border, in Laredo and in Nuevo Laredo, in both sides of the border, regulations from both countries with transfers on the truck side, that the driver cannot drive northern than 20 miles north of the border or 20 miles south of the border. So these warehouses and this infrastructure, along with this process of the transferring, has made the trucking company very robust. And then if you look at the numbers, the main partner or the main state partner of the U.S. with Mexico is Texas. And the reason because of that is that all the exports or 85% of the exports coming out of Mexico will land in Texas. And probably not in Texas, but in Laredo, because that's where they will be reworked and then redistributed. So what we need to work with the BCOs and the new BCOs that are coming into Mexico is go further north than the border, right? let's find a solution to make it more attractive to go to Chicago, to Dallas, to Atlanta, to Kansas City and St. Louis, or even to LA or to Seattle. So the benefit of railing out of Mexico would be the distance, rather than having to stop in Laredo to rework their cargo.
That makes sense.
Well, and also the customs process, if you do get that sort of nailed down a bit better, the load doesn't even have to stop at the traditional border and deal with closures and hours and things like that.
But right now, they don't have to stop at the border. Right now, think about the exports, they're pre-cleared in origin. So once they're loaded to the train, they're already exported. So they still will interchange at the borders. So it's a seamless operation, that one. It's already clear. And what we're working is exactly on the ramps. How fast can it in-gate clear and then be loaded, rather than in-gate wait to be cleared and then loaded. But yeah, in the overall, it's a better process by rail, because you don't have to stop at the border. You don't have to make lines to clear customs to go through the bridge or through the crossing. But still, there's a lot of infrastructure in Laredo that's taking that business, and it's very close to the border. And if you think that from Mexico City to the border, there's somewhere around 800 miles, it can be trucked, right? It's not the 2,000 miles from Chicago to LA. It's a short. I don't want to say it's a short haul, but it's a regular haul.
Right.
But if you think about Mexico to Chicago, well, you're talking about 1,700 miles to close to 2,000. If you're thinking about outside the Northeast or the Northwest, or even LA through the central Mexican borders, well, those lanes are more attractive economically and efficiently through rail.
So we've talked a little bit. You mentioned a short haul intermodal area in Mexico, and obviously FEC deals with short haul intermodal too. So first of all, what's like? I don't know. Maybe we start with the fact that intermodal people associate with, you do need that lengthy rail journey to maximize its efficiency, but there are these other situations. So take us through kind of how short haul intermodal works.
So the FEC is a great example of short haul intermodal, right? We move a lot of freight from Jacksonville to Miami. It's 361 miles. It tears down all theories about intermodal being efficient on more than 500 miles. We move close to 550,000 loads between Jacksonville and Miami, and that's all our franchise, and we move a lot there. But it's unique because the economy in Florida is built that way, right? It's a mousetrap where you can go down and then you come out empty no matter what. There's nothing being produced down here that can be containerized. We cannot put sunshine in a container or enough sand in bottles to put it north, right? So it's very efficient to move it in containers, because that way you don't have to put the driver down here. There are not enough rest areas throughout I-95. Miami is a very expensive city to rest drivers. So the best option is to leave it in Jacksonville. We'll take care of the southbound, deliver, then bring the empty, and then you just pick the empty up north in Jacksonville and continue route. So it has been very successful. We've started, apart from that one, well, that has been running for a while, but recently this year we started a shorter haul intermodal from Port of Miami to Miami. That's 18 miles out of the port. Miami is it's a city that's become very congested because of all the people that have come down here to live recently after COVID. And the development of the city has been to have the industrial part on the west, close to the Everglades, and all the people, the high rises, the high value houses are close to the coast or even close to the port, right? So what we've developed is to take the containers out of the port, don't have to go through any highways, roads, or whatever, and then you just pick it up on the west, closer to the industrial area, and make your last mile shorter, right? So instead of, and again, it has proven to be successful. We're getting some traction there. It's new. But instead of hauling 25 miles from the Port of Miami to the Doral industrial area, you put 12 miles on rail and you just deliver with one truck 20 containers that you can turn them throughout the day in 5 miles. Right? So that's how we envision the short haul in Florida. Mexico has this short haul from Veracruz because it's 500 miles. It's right there in the place where it could be and it could not be efficient or economically feasible. The thing is that the volumes that move from Port of Veracruz into Mexico City are big enough to make it efficient, right? There's no way, or it has been proved that there's not enough truck drivers that want to make that short haul over the road.
Yeah, it's interesting when you talk about the Miami solution in particular, because there you actually can give yourself some certainty on time, which you just can't if you're using truck driving around that same area.
Correct, and here you can think 20 miles you can make them in 2 hours in peak hours. So that on the other side you can just schedule everything. We have a departure from Port of Miami at 7 p.m. and you're available at 2 a.m. already grounded. So you can rest assured that every day at 2 a.m. your containers will be available closer to your deliveries than having to make an appointment, pick up in the port, get into the port, find your container, get loaded, and then get out to the morning rush hour.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think even with your 300 plus mile runs intra Florida, people think rail, so they think, oh yeah, but I don't want it to take that long, and it doesn't. I mean, you're talking one day, depending on when you ingate, 1 to 2 days, and really that's just on if you hit the cut times. So it's still quick.
So from Jacksonville to Miami, we run 5 trains a day. So if you don't get to the cut right now, there's another one in 4 hours. Or another one in another 4 hours. So it's like a truck-like service. Yeah, we still run in 8 hours, probably the same as a truck would be 6 to 7 hours, but we don't run out of time, right? We don't run out of working or driving hours.
Yeah, I just think it's really cool, and I don't think anybody ever thinks intermodal for that type of a distance or for that transit, but it works so well in the Florida area.
Correct. It's geographically, it makes a lot of sense.
So what is the actual network of FEC? I mean, I know there's some Georgia in there. Kind of explain to everybody kind of what that network is.
So fully FEC, it's Jacksonville to Miami. Port of Miami is our southest point. But we have agreements with both CSX to reach out Charlotte, and we have agreements with ENS to reach out Atlanta. So we can sell that as an Atlanta to Miami on the FEC, even though it could be the NS hauling it, or a Charlotte to Miami on the FEC, even though the CSX would be doing the first mile. That's our pure network. We have ramps in Titusville. Titusville will serve Central Florida, so the Orlando market. Right now, with how the prices are structured in the market, we're not that competitive to hit the West Coast, so Tampa, but that line between Orlando and the East Coast, that's definitely our sweet spot. After that, Fort Pierce, we have a ramp in Fort Pierce that has taken a lot of volume this year because of 2 main reasons, Amazon and Walmart. The big Walmart distribution center for South Florida is in Fort Pierce, and Amazon recently built another warehouse there. So Fort Pierce in the middle of nowhere is gained a lot of success this year. The other one is Fort Lauderdale. So anyone would think, and probably coming from Mexico, I always thought that having a lot of ramps in small radius was not as efficient as anybody could think, right? But I think our Fort Lauderdale ramp does not compete with our Miami ramp, even though they are 45 miles away one from the other, right? But there's enough density of freight to go to one point and to go to the other. So they don't compete, they're complementary, and they work very well for Lauderdale and Miami to distribute that part of the Broward County, the Fort Lauderdale north part, even to West Palm Beach, and then Miami has enough volume to consume everything landing in Miami.
So the other thing that I think is interesting that many people may not know is you own your own trucks too. And so for our listeners, whether it be the IMC community or the brokerage community, you can offer door-to-door services and deliveries are on your own trucks. And I think that's a big value and a big asset.
Correct. So when we are talking about this mousetrap, you don't want to put drivers here. So we want to have the drivers to make your deliveries. And we're doing store deliveries, right? So we're right on time. Our OTP is high enough to sell door deliveries. And we have our own trucks and our own chassis, so we can get your load here and make that delivery for you and put your empty back north. And then either you pick it up or we go and drop it wherever you want us to.
Well, you talked about Fort Lauderdale and Miami. I mean, I think maybe one way that people can connect with that, the fact that there's plenty of volume is just the fact that there's two ports as well. I mean, so a lot of people, outside of the industry might have taken a cruise here or there, and both of those ports have cruises, and both of those ports have plenty of activity all the way around.
No, and we do a lot of research here on how consumption moves. Florida has 29 million inhabitants, but we receive 190 million tourists, right? And all of them have breakfast, lunch, dinner, go wherever, have a drink or have a meal or buy any stuff that you can think of. But they're 190 million, right? That's larger than the population living in Mexico as a country.
I think I should add one more and go.
Which port? You don't care?
I don't care. I'm really not picky.
Or not failing. You can stay here.
Okay, good.
Well, I think, one other kind of twist on this is there's been a lot of activity on the passenger rail side because of the tourism. And so are the tracks being used the same in terms of like the Brightline and some of the other trains that are happening down there for passengers now?
So Brightline is running on our right of way, but they build their own infrastructure. And in the overall, they helped us be better because we went into the PTC area where trains have to be positive controlled. That way we avoid an accident with passengers. They run some places at 100 miles per hour, specifically between Cocoa and Orlando. So the infrastructure is top notch on both sides. So we did an upgrade to our infrastructure because of their infrastructure. Everything's scheduled. We don't have any delays because of them, and they run hourly trains from Miami to Orlando. So we live as very good friends here and coexist very peacefully. Even though we and it has gotten better because high-speed trains, and talking about high speed that you can run 70 miles per hour in the city, we have close to 300 rail crossing between West Palm Beach and Miami.
Wow.
And at the beginning was a little bit, I don't want to say confusing, but people thought that the old big FEC, not slow, but we run at 40, 50 miles per hour. You could run before that. And suddenly there's a passenger train running at 100 miles per hour. That's a surprise.
Yes.
Yeah.
So people
they learn quick, probably.
Holding at the crossing.
So we talked a little bit about, building intermodal out of Mexico. You are a member of AMTI, who we had Diego on last year. We've talked about it a bit. But from your perspective, how is that organization helping to build as well and build awareness and just keep that growing?
So that's pretty much the goal, and you just hitting on the pin. It's creating awareness that intermodal exists in Mexico, right? AMTI this year it's turning 25 years. It has grown in the past, I want to say 5-10 years dramatically because of how people have been involved in intermodal and how the customers have turned around and see that intermodal is a good solution. So what we do in AMTI is try to facilitate what's aching for each of the stakeholders in the intermodal chain in Mexico and try to smooth it among us all, between authorities, rail, dray, chassis providers, ramp operators, and customers. So it's a good opportunity, and we have our yearly conference here coming in the next couple of weeks. But the whole idea is build awareness, what's changing, what's positive, what has to be changed, and what's everybody doing to make it better.
Great. So we've gone over a few different things. So whatever you'd like to drop in terms of websites for people to visit, Florida East Coast Railway, Ferromex, AMTI, go at it.
The FEC's webpage is fecrwy.com. You'll find us as FECRWY in pretty much all social media, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook mainly. Ferromex appears as Grupo Mexico Transportes in Instagram and Facebook, and ferromex.mx, it's their webpage. You can find them there. And AMTI is AMTI.org. That's the webpage. You'll find there everything about the conference, or reach out to the management team there. They can help you set up if you have any questions about the industry in Mexico as an overall, not only Ferromex, but also CPKC or the port, or who are the biggest dray carriers. We're working right now on building a directory of dray carriers. That's how we are envisioning next year. That's the place to be. You can also find them as AMTI on Instagram, or try AMTI on LinkedIn, because it appears as Asociación Mexicana del Transporte Intermodal. That's a little bit longer. But if not, you can reach me in my email as luis.hernandez@fecrwy.com, and I'm very happy to answer any questions, or I'll guide you inside the GMXT organization to whoever you want to reach out.
That was impressive. You just rattled those off. He was not reading anything for those listening. That was just like bang, 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 bang. Well, Luis, thanks very much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you, Kevin. Shelley, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
So this was a multi-pronged conversation. We were able to, talk a little bit more about cross-border, which we've touched on a few times, and always interesting to hear another perspective. I think he gave us a very good history lesson there for intermodal in Mexico, and then jumping over to Florida, the FEC is something that I think a lot of people don't know anything about.
I would agree. And I find it interesting how we got a little port action in on that too, Kevin. We're just kind of merging different opportunities and segments together. But yeah, I would say, that's a big initiative for us here at InTek, is we want to find more of those opportunities intra-Florida, because I don't think a lot of people know the value of what FEC brings to the table, and it really is. It's a great service. It makes a lot of sense compared to truck, and so we're out there trying to educate and make sure that everybody is aware of that opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, the scheduling aspect of it, this is an area where intermodal is time competitive and sometimes better than truck, which that's not always the perception out there.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much for watching and listening, or listening. I don't know if you're watching and listening. Probably if you're watching it, you are listening. But if you're not watching it, then you're just listening. So either way, thank you for joining us on this edition of the podcast. Again, thanks very much to Luis for taking the time to speak with us. You can subscribe to our podcast through YouTube. You can also subscribe to anywhere you listen, Apple, Spotify, wherever. We are happy to have you. Please do rate and review us wherever you do consume the podcast, and drop us a comment, question, whatever. We are happy to follow up with you. You can also, if you prefer the email direction, podcast@inteklogistics.com is the address, and our website is www.intekfreight-logistics.com for more about what we do. Shelley, thanks again.
Kevin, thank you.
And thank you for listening. We are back again soon.